back to the We've All Been There podcast. My name is Maximiliano Striplin, and I'm the youth pastor here at Lifegate Church. And I'm joined with my wonderful, God-fearing, Christ-centered,
keep it coming,
Spirit-led.
You're making me have
pastor.
a wrong perspective of myself, unhealthy
Pastor
perspective
Chad
of
Benson.
myself.
How are you doing, Pastor?
Hey, I'm good, Max. Thanks for always building me up, and excited about this episode of the We've All Been There podcast. We're not even pretending. We're filming 2 episodes in
Back
the
to
same
back.
day, back to back.
We didn't change
even
outfits.
change outfits. I was thinking of that. We should have got
I
a
thought
new
about that,
shirt or something.
Ain't nobody got
put
time for
on,
that.
But it's all right, man. We'd have messed up our hair or something. So, no, man, we're doing a second episode in the same day because we've been on this series that we've been talking about healthy leadership, and we talk about we've all been healthy and what that looks like. We're breaking it down into 4 parts, and of course, everybody wants to be healthy. We'd all like to have six-pack abs. We'd all like to have, the big biceps. We'd all like to have the trimmed down chin, no double chins here because we got the Riz face, right? We're doing our mewing so that we can be healthy and in shape, and but obviously we're kidding around there and having a little fun. But a lot of people want to be physically healthy, but it's even more important to be mentally, emotionally healthy, spiritually healthy, and be healthy, especially as a leader. And that's what we've been talking about. It's healthy leadership. And we've been looking at this guy named Nehemiah, who was a very healthy leader in the Bible. And a lot of times you get this idea that if you have healthy practices in your life, then you won't be successful. And yet Nehemiah was extremely successful. We see he had great self-awareness. He had a great prayer life. He had great empathy and compassion. He lived for values and convictions. He was resilient, courageous, confident, and humble at the same time. He had a great balance, and yet he was still successful because he completed the wall in 52 days. And so I love the story of Nehemiah and so much that we can learn there. So we've kind of just broken down his leadership into these 4 different aspects of healthy leadership. We talked about healthy posture, how he postured himself in prayer and in submission and humility. Last month we talked about healthy perspective, how he had just a healthy vision. He saw himself right, and he saw his calling or his assignment right, and that's what kept him healthy. And so today we're going to talk about healthy processes. Like, he wasn't just healthy, he stayed healthy through the entire ordeal. He didn't start out healthy and then finish the project and then crash and burn. He stayed healthy, and I think that's because he had processes. He had habits. He had different routines that you could see in his story there that helped them to not just be healthy, but to stay healthy. So let's talk about that a little bit today. Max, you got any healthy processes? You got some stuff that you do to try to keep yourself healthy in your leadership?
Yeah, definitely. I think when I'm my healthiest self, these processes are alive and well and active. I'm not claiming that is all the time, right? But definitely one of my processes would be reading my Bible morning prayer every single day, right? So before I get to work or the first few moments of my work day, I spend some time in prayer, reading my Bible, spending some time in that. So that's a start of my process. And then I would say at the end of the day, after I get out of work, before I get comfortable, I try to go to the gym. Because I know the moment I lay on the couch,
sit down,
lay on the couch, scroll my phone, it's over, right? It's doom scroll time. It's I'm done for. And so I feel like I have a good opening, start of the day process, and a good end of the workday process. And then I would say, kind of our end of the process, I always just like to be super intentional before my wife and I go to bed. I just like to spend some time, if we want to talk, if we want to just close the day out, knowing that she knows that hey, I'm invested in this.
Yeah, I'm available.
Yeah, I'm available if we need to talk about anything, if we just need to laugh, or whatever we need to do in that moment, just to be able to have a healthy process in every day. So
man, that's so good. I think those are important, and you keep those routines going. And I know, like you said, there are times when we're better at them than other times, but in those healthiest moments, we have those routines going. I do the same thing. I've been doing a daily walk and I walk about 3 miles in the morning. And that just for me, the exercise part of it's good, but it's the mental. That's how I have my prayer time, and I'll walk the neighborhood and I pray.
Yeah.
And I'm much more focused in my prayer there, and in those times. And so that's become something very regular. It's helped me to stay healthy. I take regular times away, at least a couple times a year that I get away to just be with the Lord. I just got back from my vision retreat just a few weeks ago, where I'm thinking and praying about the future and what God has for us in 2025 and things like that. And so that's super a good process to try to stay healthy. I see my counselor once a month. I get to be with him next week and process through things. And so got some healthy processes for dealing with things. And I'm the same way. There are times when I get out of those routines, and when I do, I find myself not being as healthy.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we're talking about in this episode here, or this part of the series, is that, hey, in order to be healthy leaders, we've got to have processes that keep us healthy. And so when I was looking at Nehemiah, I saw a couple of things that I thought he had a healthy process for dealing with. And the first one that I saw here is that he had a healthy process for dealing with grief. In fact, when you think about life, and especially ministry or leadership, there are tons of times when you experience loss, when things don't go the way that you want them to go, things that you expected and your expectations are not met. I know as a pastor, I feel that, times when somebody leaves the church, times when maybe somebody that you trusted says something negative behind your back, or maybe there have been times when people that you poured into for months, maybe even years, and then they decide to kind of go in a different direction, or they don't decide to stay in connection with you or with the church. And I know there's been people that we helped, and then they end up going to another church. One time, I've told this story before. One time I gave some people my car, and because they needed a car, and I got a different car. It wasn't a new car, but a different one. And instead of selling it, could have made a little bit of money on it, but I helped this family out, gave my car, and then I'm not kidding. It was like a month later, I got an email from them saying, "Hey, we're going to another church because we're not getting fed at your church." I'm like, "Oh my goodness!"
I fed you a car.
Yeah, exactly. And those things hurt, and those are losses. Those are griefs. Sometimes you have dreams in your heart that are just delayed, or they don't happen. And so a lot of times we don't even recognize these things as grief. So that really keeps us from taking the time to process them. Sometimes we only see grief as somebody dying, but it's not just physical death. It's the death of any kind of hope, or any kind of dream, or any kind of desire, any kind of loss is grief. And man, if we don't deal with those, if we don't have processes for dealing with those, it can result in a lot of unhealthy reactions, a lot of unhealthy ways of coping. Sometimes we get angry. Sometimes we end up doing things that are unhealthy, for eating things and doing stuff that are unhealthy for us, or unhealthy in our relationships. We made this quote a couple of weeks ago, just kind of spontaneously, but it reminded me here again of that C.S. Lewis quote where he says, "I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her name was grief." And man, sometimes we don't recognize grief for actually being grief. And if we don't recognize it, then we're definitely not going to deal with it. And if we don't have processes for that in our life. And so when I was thinking about Nehemiah, he had grief. He was told that the walls of Jerusalem were torn down, and that the people were, in disgrace, and that the city was in ruin. And of course, he loved that city. That was God's city. He loved God's people. And so he experienced that grief and that loss. But he didn't just immediately stand up to go and do something about it. The first thing that he did when he experienced the grief, he heard of the loss, was that it says in Nehemiah 1:4 that when he heard these things, he sat down and he wept. And for days, it says he mourned, or he grieved, and he fasted, and he prayed before the God of heaven. And so he had a process. He knew, okay, when there is loss, I can't just immediately try to go fix the loss or regain the loss. What I got to do is I got to realize that loss is going to affect me. It's going to affect my emotions, and so I have to process my grief. He had a process for that. He mourned and he fasted and he prayed for several days. And so here's what I'm trying to say is, like, if we're going to be healthy in our leadership, we have to learn to grieve. It's okay to grieve, and I think sometimes an unhealthy view of leadership is that I have to be strong all the time. And I'm the leader, so I got to be the one that's strong, and I got to make sure nobody can see that I'm sad or that I'm grieving or whatever. But actually, grieving is not a show of weakness. It's actually a way to regain strength. Matthew 5:4 says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And so if we recognize the grief, we lean into that, we have processes for how to deal with that, that's when we gain comfort. That's when we gain strength. Psalm 143 verse 3 says, He heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. So when our hearts are broken, if we bring those to God, He'll bind us up. It's not a weakness. It's actually a way to regain strength. Isaiah 40 and verse 31 says, those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. And so that's what Nehemiah was doing. He didn't just go in his own strength to go try to rebuild the wall. He took the time to process the grief, waiting on the Lord through prayer and through fasting, through grieving, through whatever that process needs to look like for people. And what happens is then he renewed his strength. So Nehemiah had that process for grief.
Yeah, I know this specific process has been massive for me this year. I know about 6 months ago, I felt like I was in one of the darker parts of my life, which is weird, right? Because I'm in ministry, and what was interesting is that I think when I had a hard time, like my last hard time, I would say, when I felt like I was burned out and just really struggling, I felt like it was very ministry focused, And I feel like this time around it was very much the church is going great, youth ministry is going great, our team is awesome, our staff is awesome, I feel loved and cared for by my pastors. I felt great at the church. I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt like everything was going really great. But I felt like just my life didn't look the way I thought it was going to look. And that had nothing to do with my job. And so I remember one day, Amy and I asked her, hey, can you come sit on the couch? And I just sat her down on the couch in the living room, and I just had to be honest with her. I just had to go through a moment where I just said, hey, I'm not okay. And I'm not a crier, but I just remember just the tears just started to flow, and I just told her hey, I need to talk to my counselor, because I know for me, part of one of my processes is I am not going to let myself make poor decisions or go this direction, but I'm going to have a checkpoint, right? If I start having certain thoughts, if I start having certain feelings, that is part of the process for me to go, hey, this isn't what I want. This isn't healthy. And so I know I need to go talk to a counselor. I need to go talk to somebody. I need to have a conversation, because I don't want to go from thought to action or thought to plan, And so for me, I didn't like where my thoughts and my feelings were. And so my process was to talk to my counselor. And from there, he gave me some great steps of what I needed to do and what that looks like. And again, I think detail versus honesty, right? That's the thing, right? The two levers, right?
Yeah. Truth and detail.
Truth and detail, yeah. So I'm giving you truth here, not all the details, but because of how the counselor helped me, it helped me to have some tools to go hey, we need to talk through these things. And I know for myself, that first session I had, I went into it kind of scared, just because I'm about to pour my heart out. You know what I mean? And I was kind of scared to do that and just be really honest with somebody else, right? In that, and I remember when I talked to my counselor, I'm just bawling my eyes out. I'm just crying my heart out, and it was night and day. I got off that call, and it was oh, I feel so much better. Yeah, it was such a relief. And so I know for myself, it was on the other side of that even that process of just being able to grieve. And one of the biggest things that my counselor told me is it's okay to grieve the loss. And sometimes the loss isn't a death. Sometimes the loss isn't a person or a thing. And for me, it was, I had to grieve the loss of what I thought my life would look like. Yeah. And so at that moment, here's what I realized about anger and sorrow and sadness is that anger, I feel in my personal journey of life, anger tends to make us want to hurt others or to destruct, right? To destroy. What I've learned in myself is that grief causes me to self-destruct, right? I want to like destroy my own life, not hurt somebody else. I just like, and so I learned that in myself. And so for me, when I get to that point where I'm like, I don't like the thoughts that I'm having about myself or the way that I'm living my own life. And so I had to come to a point where like, I need to talk to somebody and I need to process this grief healthily, or else it will cause me to self-destroy. So
yeah, man, that's so powerful because thankfully you had a process.
Yeah.
You knew, okay, hey, I got to talk to my wife. I got to talk to my counselor. Obviously, you're talking to the Lord about these things.
Absolutely.
And you took the time to set. A lot of people don't take the time to do it. They just try to, I got to be strong. I got to push through it. Or they don't recognize that it is grief, and grief has to be processed. And so then it comes out in anger towards others or anger towards themselves. And even that moment of that process, your process was talking, and one of those talking to your counselor, that was how God began to bring comfort and healing through that other person. Sometimes the other person didn't even have to say anything. It's just, I got to get it out. Yep. That's what my counselor's always telling me sometimes, because I'll get on with him and we're on for an hour. Usually I'm like 40 minutes of it is me talking, and then I'll be apologizing. Like, I'm supposed to be listening to you, and why am I doing all the talking? And he'll just always tell me, you got to get it out.
Yeah.
It's in there. There's got to be a way to get it out. Sometimes it's journaling. Sometimes I just have to type and just write, and just sometimes I go on my walks. It's me just getting it out to the Lord. Sometimes it's talking to Amber. But those processes of grief that a lot of times we just try to say, I'm going to be strong, or I'm going to get out there and fix it, which Nehemiah is going to go and try to, correct the problem, but he doesn't go out there before he first processes the grief. So that's the first process that I think is a healthy process for leaders. Second process that I see there with Nehemiah is that he has a healthy process for dealing with conflict. So we got grief that's loss, but then we have conflict that's, anytime when you're in leadership, you're going to have times when you're trying to accomplish something and somebody doesn't think you're doing it the right way, or they have a different opinion of how it needs to be done, or different personalities, all those things. And so Nehemiah, he had his share of conflict. You just read it over and over and over again, that where people were coming up against him, Sanballat and Tobias and Geshem, and a couple of guys who were up to no good start making trouble in the neighborhood, and they're just like constantly causing him trouble, causing him conflict when he's trying to rebuild the wall. But over and over and over, you see that he deals with that conflict in a healthy way. In Nehemiah 5, we see this situation where the Jewish people they're struggling because the leaders are charging them too much tax, and so they're having to sell their field and even put their children into slavery to pay these taxes and stuff. And so they bring it to Nehemiah, and it makes Nehemiah angry, but he doesn't just go and confront those leaders in anger. He deals with the conflict in a healthy manner. And so in verse 7, it says, after I thought about it. And I thought that was the important part that I wanted to pull out there, was that he didn't just go in haste. Man, these people are doing something that's not right, so I'm going to go tell them what for. No, he processed it. That's what we're talking about. He processed it before he approached it. And then after he had processed it, he had a vision or a discernment for how he was going to approach the leaders. He approached the other leaders. He shared his concerns with them. He did call them to bring about a change. And they responded in a good way and stopped doing what they were doing. He did the same later with the priests, and he even called them to make a promise to the people. And so there's some pretty healthy leadership, conflict resolution type stuff that's going on here, that we notice that Nehemiah didn't avoid the conflict. He addressed it, but he addressed it in a healthy way. And so in leadership, all of us are going to face conflict. In ministry, all of us are going to face conflict because we're talking about people. We're dealing with people. So there's going to be disagreements. And so many times, I think when we're unhealthy in leadership, I think our tendency is to want to avoid the conflict. Then there are times when we're unhealthy that we run straight to the conflict and we address it in haste or in anger, or in a prideful way. And both those are unhealthy ways to deal with conflict. But healthy leaders, they've learned, hey, there's a process. Conflict's not something to avoid. It's not something to fear. It's something that I have to lead through as a leader. But if I'm healthy, then I can lead through it in a healthy way and even develop some healthy processes for how I'm going to lead through it. And so I've even learned, as I've grown in this area, there's been recent times when I've had to deal with conflict in some of the work that I do. And man, I've learned to process it beforehand to even go in with the framework if I'm going to have a conversation with someone, that I'm not just showing up. Like, first of all, I've prayed.
Yeah.
And asked the Lord to help my heart to be right and asked the Lord to soften their heart. But secondly, I've come in with a plan. And I've written things down that I'm not going to sit there and read what I wrote, but I've written it down. So in my mind, I know this is the direction that I would like for this conflict, conversation, this difficult conversation to go, and where I'm trying to lead it. And it's a process, not just something that I'm, doing just kind of flying by the seat of my pants, but there's a process to it.
Yeah. I think one of the healthiest things to remember in the middle of conflict is that, you're like kind of on the same side. Like you kind of have this common ground if you believe in Jesus. I was just recently reading out of Philippians 4, and Paul writes this letter to the church of Philippi, obviously, but there were these two ladies in the church. Yep. And it was, I think her name
Priscilla and Aquila. Was that who it was?
I think it was Euodia. I don't even know if I said that name right, but and another was like Syntyche or something.
Oh, okay.
And so it's these two ladies who are having conflict between each other, right? And then he says, agree in the Lord, know? And he says this, but then he goes into that really popular verse 4-8, which I've memorized because I love it so much. And I've memorized 6-8, but I think I need to memorize 4-6 as well. But it says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say it, rejoice. Let your graciousness be evident to all. The Lord is near, right? Then it goes into do not be anxious about anything, but everything by prayer, petition, right? It goes into those verses. And that word graciousness has like 6 different words that are used in all the different versions. So it says graciousness, it says reasonableness, it says considerate in all you do, gentle in spirit. And he addresses these two ladies in the Lord, and then he goes on to say, rejoice in the Lord.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, remember in the middle of conflict, remember before you even start having this conversation, because conflict is not bad.
Yeah.
Conflict, if it leads to resolution, is a great thing. But this whole idea of, hey, before you start the meeting, just remember this one thing, right? Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say it, rejoice. Let your graciousness, let your gentleness and spirit, let your reasonableness, right? Be reasonable, because guess what? The Lord is near. And that verse, the Lord is near, theologically you could take it both ways, right? The Lord is near. He's coming one day, right? He's coming back for us. Or the Lord is present in that conversation. And so I think in the middle of conflict, I have to remind myself, the Lord is near. Let my graciousness be evident to all. In everything I do, let my heart be evident that, hey, I love you. My heart is not for you to be wrong. My heart is not to be right. My heart is that you would love Jesus for the rest of your life. That is my heart. That is my heart at the core of who I am as a pastor. My heart is that everybody that I ever interact with would follow Jesus for the rest of their life. And so when I'm in the middle of conflict, I got to remind myself those things, right? You got to go into these meetings reminding yourself, like, they are not the enemy.
Yeah.
I am not against them, right? I don't have to be right. The goal is resolution. So you got to remember what your purpose is in the middle of these things that are going on. And so I've learned that when it's said and done at the end of the conversation, and this is something that you've taught me, is that in the middle of conflict, at the end of it, you got to go, hey, what did you just hear me say?
Mm-hmm.
And then, hey, this is what I heard you say.
Yeah.
And it gives both of you the opportunity to go like, hey, that's not what I said, or that's not what I heard.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's that Stephen Covey quote that says, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. And so I want them to understand me, but first of all, I want to make sure I'm understanding them. And then I'm just sitting over here thinking of how dumb I was to say Priscilla and Aquila. I looked up who they were. I'm like, that's not them. What am I thinking? But
yeah.
But anyway, I think that's so good that when you're going into a conversation like that you're going in with the right heart, the right purpose, the right focus is not just to I'm going to tell them all the things that they did wrong, or I'm going to try to make sure that they get on my side. No, I'm going to seek to understand and make sure that there's an understanding. And we may not still be able to agree after a conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but we can love each other. We can understand, and so that's kind of what Nehemiah did there. These people that were doing stuff that was wrong, but because he approached them the right way, they all got on the same page. Yeah. And even if they hadn't, hopefully they would have been able to move forward as far as followers of God. And so so powerful. So here's Nehemiah. He's got processes for dealing with his grief. He's got processes for dealing with the conflict that he faces. Then we find out that he has a process for dealing with rest. He doesn't just push through, but he stays healthy because he's willing to take the time to rest. And even with all the work that needed to be done, Nehemiah still practiced a Sabbath, and he also made sure that the people that were on his team were practicing a Sabbath as well. We see it in Nehemiah 13 and verse 19. With evening shadows, when evening shadows fell on the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I ordered the doors to be shut and not opened until the Sabbath was over. I stationed some of my own men at the gates so that no one could be brought in on the Sabbath day. So he's just not processing rest. He's making sure that everybody else is resting as well as keeping the Sabbath. And so I read that and I thought, man, this is what I thought when I read that. I thought the walls were destroyed. They were rebuilt in 52 days. Yeah. But if you count in there the Sabbath days, that actually means they were rebuilt in something like 45 days because they rested every seventh day. And so I thought, man, here's the thing. All of us have plenty of work to do, stuff that needs to get done. Yeah. But when we take the time to rest, then we're able to be more productive in our work. And we also have the blessing of God upon our work. And we'll stay healthier as we're doing the work. And so, that's what I would just say for leaders, to learn to be like Nehemiah and to learn processes for how to rest and how to take that time and how to take those Sabbaths. But then if you're a senior leader, also make sure, hey, I'm not just resting, but I'm making sure that I'm giving opportunity for my team to rest and making sure they have those healthy processes as well. And when we do that, then our whole team is better and actually more gets done in a shorter amount of time because we've learned how to rest.
Yeah. Something that we say here is we work hard and play hard, right? Yep. And we know the difference. And so we had our big event this last night for me. So last night was our big event, and we're doing the podcast today, the next day. And man, it's been a crazy month. So we had 4 weeks of a super series, which is like small, big events. And then we had our big event, Halloween last night. And so, man, a lot of work that has been done. But now what I'm excited for is going into this next month. Next week I'm going to a conference in Nashville, and I love Nashville. I have a friend there, and so I'm going to spend some time, get some rest. I'm gonna play hard. Yeah. And so I'm going to do something I love. I'm going to learn about Jesus. I'm a theology nerd, and so I'm going to learn a lot about theology. But I know for myself, I've realized that your processes are meant to serve you, right? The system is meant to serve you, right? And if the system isn't serving you, then you need to change the system, and that's okay, right? And so I know for myself, my process looked different during the school year, and my process looks different during the summer, right? What I've learned with this part of rest is that over the summer, we have camp and missions. This last summer, we had 2 missions trips in camp, and it was all in the month of July. And it was like July 10th through the 13th, I'm at camp. July 16th through 18th, I'm at level 1 missions trip. July 22nd through the 27th, I was at the level 2 missions trip in LA. And it was just back to back to back to back. And then I was like, my process had to look different there, right? My times where I spent time with Jesus, right? How I processed my journaling, right? Had to look different. And then how I rested had to look different, right? Because I wasn't able to take a 24-hour period to kind of like rest in the midst of those days, right? So I knew like, hey, I'm storing it up, right? I'm gonna run fast, and we're gonna run hard, and then at the end of that month, on August 1st, I went to Guatemala, Honduras, and I just checked out for 10 days. Yeah. And so it was beautiful. It was an amazing time, but that looked different in the summer than it does in the school year, right? And so like I can't leave for 10 days right now, but I'm like, I can leave for 4 days.
Yeah.
And so it looks different. The rest looks different. And I know for myself, we just need to look at the process and go like, hey, how do I need to rest in this season based off of my schedule? And a youth pastor schedule looks different than a lead pastor schedule.
Yeah.
And so it's obviously different for every department and ministry, but you got to understand, like, sometimes you got to switch up the process.
But that was a process. You had a plan. You were intentional about it. You knew, okay, I'm getting ready to run through a gauntlet here for about a month, but I have something out there that I'm going to look forward to that's going to be my rest.
Yes.
And I intentionally planned that in. And like you said, the season for that looked different than the season for me, because in July, that's really for me more of a rest time. We have our staff series, where our staff is preaching through the month of July mostly, and so I'm resting more during that time. But I know August is one of my most busy months, as we're back to school and the things that we do there, and so we have to be intentional about it. And I think that's the key to this word process, is that there is a process, there is a plan, that we don't just let things happen to us. If we're going to stay healthy, it's going to be because we're intentional about being healthy, which means we're going to have processes for dealing with the times when we experience loss and grief. We're going to have processes for dealing with the times when we experience conflict. We're going to have processes for dealing with the times that we're busy and we have those seasons that we're running like crazy, so that we can rest. We do put rest in a regular routine. It's a weekly thing, but sometimes it's not as much as what we are needing because we're in that season, but then we're putting that thing out there to look forward to, that we're going, hey, I'm going to get an extra rest. And that's a biblical thing too, because even they would have, Sabbath, but then they would have seasons after that where, they'd go a whole year of Jubilee and things like that, where they had extended types of Sabbath. And so those are all biblical processes. And like you said, the process is meant to serve us and serve our health. Mm-hmm. And so even like Jesus said that man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. And so it's not a it's not a ritualistic thing or a legalistic thing. It is hey, this is a process that's going to help me stay healthy so that I can be in this thing in the long run. I can accomplish the purposes that God has for me, just like Nehemiah did. And so that's what our goal is for We've All Been There podcast, is to be, relevant and be real and be able to relate to everyone, and go like, hey, sometimes we get this right, sometimes we don't. Sometimes we misspeak, sometimes we say Priscilla and Aquila, and that's actually a married couple, not even like two people that were arguing with each other in the book of Philippians, and we blow it sometimes, we mess up sometimes, but even though we don't get it right all the time, we go, hey, we've all been there, but we all want to make it to the end. And so I want everybody that's watching and listening, I want you to make it to the end in your leadership, whatever that looks like for you. I want you to be able to go, hey, we finished the wall. We finished the work like Nehemiah did. And so if that's going to happen, we got to stay healthy. So hopefully this is a help to you. We got one more in this series that we'll hit, and we look forward to bringing that to you as well. Thank you so much for watching and listening on the We've All Been There podcast. We would love it if you would share this out, if you'd subscribe, if you'd make comments, let your friends know so that they can join us for the We Have All Been There podcast. And we will see you next month. And next time we'll have different clothes on. All right. See you then. Bye.